Hello 2D character animation, Emily here, and I just wanted to touch base with you and talk a little bit about planning for your final projects. Hopefully you are working on your model sheets for your final character designs, and when you create those model sheets and finish them, uh, feel free to post them on the discussion board. I'd love to see your sketches and planning. And after that, you're just going to create those digital assets like I talked about last week. And essentially, you're creating your actor, which is an interesting part of pre-production. That's not normally something done in live film, creating your actors. But we still need a scene or set to put this actor in and just plan what we're going to do and animate with them. So one thing we want to keep in mind is just by failing to prepare, we are preparing to fail, especially with animation. We don't want to do anything unnecessary because that's just going to add to render time overall as well. So this is really similar for planning like a live action film. You want to think of what you're going to be doing for your scene or short film. Sometimes you'll be working on another project, but it's still good to understand what the plan is. If you're creating your own project, just kind of brainstorming what you want to accomplish or the story you want to tell. You don't really need to focus on writing or do really a narrative for this project. You really just need to put your character in a scene. So you're going to be storyboarding more than I really expect you to animate. You don't really need to submit a script or anything, but I just wanted to talk about what this process is in general. Storyboarding is really the focus, and that's just breaking down that script into a shot list and then into drawings, so we know how frames are going to be composited, what the kind of movement's going to be, what we're going to need to create as far as assets. We can take that storyboard and create an animatic, just doing loose animation to get a sense of the timing, and often add the dialogue of the cast to that as well. And then just what it would take to plan overall. So typically with production for film, just all the pre-production is first, all the planning, the writing, the prep work. The production in this case would be animating and then recording the audio needed. And then once all those assets are created, you'd be compositing them, adding your special effects, all of your Foley, the soundtrack, which is big in the storytelling, any kind of translation or captions, and then the rendering and distribution of it. So brainstorming the project is obviously crucial, and if you're new to storyboarding or just visual thinking, a really helpful exercise is just imagining how you would draw toast being created. It's something we can all relate to, and it's just a sequential thing that we can break down into steps and not really necessarily focus on how it'd be framed, but just kind of translating the process. So there's a link here with some workshop information and some steps, a fun little gallery of information. I love some of these drawings. Just like with any storyboard, it's really not very important what your drawing abilities are. Obviously, there's going to be some really fancy ones. It's really about just communicating the ideas. Some of these don't even involve machinery. It's just open flame. That one's lovely. Color is sometimes useful. Arrows are always helpful with showing character movement or camera movement. Camera being part of the compositing at the end. So that's just a good exercise if you haven't really done this kind of work before. If you've done live action stuff, you probably have, but it's a little different planning-wise for animation. With the writing, just thinking of who is your audience, who's going to be receiving the story, also known as just the demographic. If you're a writer, know that there is only revising and editing. There's really no writing. It's a continuous process overall. Here's a storyboard from just one of the classics, Indiana Jones, showing the movement of the scene. When doing live action, this kind of thing just helps the whole cast and crew understand what's needed. It's really important to get everybody on the same page, just because you can't really have people making stuff up as they go. It's basically a blueprint for the film. Animation would be the same. You've got dozens, if not hundreds, of animators making this film, and you want to make sure that everybody's ideas are in sync and conveying the actual story. So to go from the writing to the visuals to the animation, you would break down the script and kind of describe what's happening and think about how that's framed. So you might have your animation, you wouldn't have everything necessarily be full body shots. You might do some close-ups to convey emotion or kind of do a two-shot to show people talking. So just thinking about what the composition and framing of each shot's going to be, each scene. That list is just something you can share with other people and use as a checklist as you're animating. Also when you're recording the Foley. The storyboarding itself is just the visual of that shot list. The storyboarding itself is just the visual representation of that shot list, showing the camera angles, any kind of movement within the compositing, the audio cues. If it's 3D, there's going to be lighting as well, and even more data needed than a 2D animation. It shows what the art's going to be sequentially, even if it's not animated in order. That's going to happen in the final editing process. It also helps just conveying scale, proportion, all the different things that are going to be needed, like the props and the scenes. This is actually from a puppet web series of mine called The Avengeables, and I used index cards, which are the ideal ratio for storyboarding, and just the shot and scene number are in that upper left-hand corner, like shot 1, scene 2, and then I just kind of frame the movement and what's going to be within the shot itself. There's lots of templates out there for storyboarding. I like using index cards, like I said. Sometimes you can use just a sheet of paper. There's nothing wrong with using sketches, but you can also use a Wacom tablet if you're more comfortable with the stylus. Here's an example where you would write out the narration, any kind of effects, what the movement might be, if there's music. You can show the characters and how much of the characters are going to be seen. You might have different puppets here or different animations of a full body one to the far left, and maybe you'd have a larger, just kind of full face puppet for the far right for any close-ups with like your eyelid and lip animation. It really just depends on what's needed. It could also be the same puppet with really high resolution artwork that you just scale up, but that's why you're trying to figure out what you're going to need. Here's an example from just a basic shoot or commercial showing some camera movements. Again, that'd be more for 3D, but you're also animating movement when you're working in things like After Effects. And this gives you a sense of the scenes and settings that you would need to draw. Here's a nice little narrative. Nonverbal is going to be easier to do, obviously, than verbal, just because you're not going to need to cast and record any dialogue. But then you're going to have to rely on your expressions of your characters a lot more. And that's just going to require that much more finesse with animating. So if it's frame by frame and traditional, you can really get a sense of it there. If it's something with character animator, you would definitely want a different mouth forms, different eyebrows, lots of different mouth sets and shapes that would swap out. Here's an example from an animated series here. Most of the shots are kind of full body, there's some close-ups, but you get an idea of the style of the series and just the sequence of the art. This sequence could almost be seen as keyframes. In traditional animation, you have kind of the intervals of what's going to be animated, and then the tweeners are doing the in-between. This is a little more higher level than that because this is actually showing the overall scene, and then different animators might do individual sequences here. Now, I can't help but include some of my favorite storyboards just from film. This is one from Jaws. As awesome as the Jaws storyboard is, this one might even be that much more awesome, only because it is an actual storyboard sequence from the movie Taxi Driver, and I love the simplicity of the drawings and also just the use of color to show kind of the movement of the blood, and also that it's in basically every single shot, but very descriptive of the scene. This is from a little unknown film called Star Wars. One of the greatest establishing shots of all time is under the Star Destroyer, and you kind of get a sense of the character design, but you can tell that that's changed over time with C-3PO and R2-D2. Leia always had the buns, though. That is eternal. Here's a sequence from Peter Pan. You could see it's a smaller ratio because things were 4:3 when this film was done, so that changes kind of the scale of the frame. Some really lovely silhouettes of some objects. I love that ship in the beginning. Because this is hand-drawn, you really see a lot of expression here, and some principles of animation. There's some squash and stretch with some of these characters. You can almost imagine the arcs of their movements, like that accordion player and that fourth thumbnail. But some really lovely sequential art going on here. I feel like an animator seeing this would have a really good idea of what the scene conveys. And so that's really it. You wouldn't want to do any unnecessary animation, but you also want to know what you're going to need to create as well. So what you're going to need for the scene, and things like special effects, like those lights, these days might be something done in After Effects versus something done by hand. Sometimes you might be animating something for a commercial work or something just kind of that's not a narrative. So this is more just an example of a sequence of something happening, the different things that might be zooming in. So just a different example of style. This one uses color unnecessarily, but if this was being presented to a client, it might give them a better idea of what's going on, because I have no idea. I think that's some kind of trophy he's carving out of mashed potatoes, but my guess is as best as anybody. This is one of my favorite storyboards ever. This is from the movie Inception. I love that this is an all vertical shot that's kind of showing how the hallway is rolling and how they're fighting in the process. I think that this would give people a good idea, whether they're the camera people or the stunt team, a good idea of how this complicated sequence is going to play out. And it's just really cool looking. Now, I realize I've been showing a lot of film examples. I just want to show some animated ones as well. And I'll put this link on Blackboard as well. But here's some examples from different animated films also, like Kung Fu Panda. So you get nice movement and kind of how he's going to be fighting here. A nice thing about this link is going to be that most of them, some of the links don't exist anymore, but a lot of these are going to show you what that scene actually ended up looking like. And I'm not going to play each one of these in this recording, because then you're not going to get the audio and everything else, but it is fun to see the before and after, whether you're talking about an animated film or a live action one, especially when there's a lot of special effects or just things going on. But I love seeing all parts of the filmmaking process. So just a few more examples here. Here's Up. Some of these are smaller images. I have them blown up the best I could. You could see these are index cards all pinned to a wall. This is usually what I do when I'm working on something. It's also nice because you could swap out things if an image gets replaced or updated. Updated, I didn't mean to do that, but here we are. That's the opening scene from Up, supposedly, but you can find that online. Here's a classic one with Tom and Jerry. You could tell with that 4:3 ratio again. So these are pretty simple, but perfect for Thanksgiving, the way this... I love the intervals here of this turkey being devoured. Summer Camp Island, whatever that is, you get the sense of something magical going on here. I love the way that this little witch hat appears. I've never actually heard of this before, but let's just take a quick gander. It's a pretty cute style. And I think that little bit, oh, that happened right here actually before the hat changed. Beautiful. I feel like that's very true to what was storyboarded. Here's one from Batman. This has got to be one of the best title sequences ever. Really great silhouettes and movement. As I put my cursor over it, I get this awful... It's like the Joker, isn't that the color palette interrupting? But really great style and movement, just tons of arcs. You really get a sense of how it's going to flow with this. Adventure Time, nice and simple, doesn't need any color, lots of room for descriptions underneath. And there's some video game examples in here as well, which count as animation, so... Just a few more. But I hope you check these out individually as well. So after you're done storyboarding, you would actually create an animatic if it was required, usually in really big productions or if there's a lot of animators, just to really make sure your timing is down. Both of the examples I have to do with live action. However, the animatics themselves use a lot of animation, and they're two of my favorite examples. I use them again in compositing. I apologize in advance. But the blend in this Iron Man sequence is great because there's this low polygon 3D. There's some really basic Wacom drawing. I think they use a action figure for Iron Man in some sequences here. Kind of this low grade stop motion. But this is one of the greatest animatics I've ever seen. And there's audio, not them speaking, but kind of explosion sounds and stuff. So it's really entertaining in itself. The shift to blue here when he's underwater is really subtle and great as well. So beautiful action sequence here, whether you're watching the previs or the sequence itself. Another favorite example, just from another favorite film, is Jurassic Park. This is a rare instance where the animatic is actually done with stop motion. They actually were planning on doing the film in stop motion originally, kind of Ray Harryhausen style. Phil Tippett did this awesome sequence. I highly recommend watching this as well. The dinosaur animation's awesome, but then you also have this hilarious use of these skipper dolls, so I guess the lesson here would just be planning doesn't have to be pretty. I won't play this whole thing out because, again, you should watch it yourself, but beautiful stop motion animation here. And it's extremely similar to the final sequence, even the lighting, the movement, everything. So a very, very, very detailed animatic. And so I hope that's helpful, just kind of thinking about the process of going from your idea, what elements you're going to need, writing out any kind of script, even if it's really loose, coming up with how you're going to frame the shots that you determine you need, and then just kind of going from there and creating the rest of the assets you might need, like your backgrounds, your props, your special effects, your ability to edit and undo, which is also really crucial. I think that said special effects at one point, and just like that, it appears. True magic. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to post a lot of resources in the Week 13 folder, but have fun and enjoy finishing up your character design and just thinking about what you want that character to do to finish out the class.